Three, two, one, here we go. RAINMAN'S Take podcast. Observations on the world we live in. My take on current events and other topics of interest. Also, interviews with some really cool people. So let's get the conversation going. Hey everybody, it's the Rain Man back with another episode for you today. But before I get into it, if you are part of the RAINMAN'S Take community, thank you very much. If you are new to the program, welcome. I know you're going to enjoy the content. So if you could, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button down in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And also, please watch the video to the end. That's going to help me with the YouTube algorithm so that we can get this out to more people and really get the conversation going. So with that being said, I wanted to talk today about the current situation in the Ukraine-Russia conflict and what is the end state there. So my speculation is due in large part to my complete lack of confidence that the current administration has the influence that they think they do. And in my view, that influence is waning fast on the world stage. Now, I blame Biden for our global weakness, and it is on display in Ukraine. I read an interesting article recently which looks at the possibility of a coup in Ukraine. And I'll go ahead and I'll read from this article here. I got this from InfoWars, and the title of the article was, "The West Has Lost Confidence. Political dysfunction in Ukraine may cost Zelensky his job." And this is by Sputnik, and it was on November 28, 2023. Amidst political infighting and underwhelming performance on the battlefield, security analyst Mark Sloboda believes the foreign backers of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky may be looking for a way to remove him from power without another blatantly obvious U.S.-backed coup. That's the conclusion of international affairs and security analyst Mark Sloboda, who joined Sputnik's Political Misfits crew Monday to discuss the ongoing political drama in Ukraine in the wake of the country's failed counteroffensive this year. And quoting Sloboda here, he fears another Maiden. He fears another coup, referring to the 2014 protests that saw far-right mobs drive elected President Viktor Yanukovych out of Ukraine. The unrest, openly backed by Western powers, was supported by only a minority of the Ukrainian population, but succeeded in firmly shifting the politics of the country towards a Russia-phobic stance. Sloboda believes the primary challenger to Zelensky's power is Valery Zelensky, the current commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian military. Political forces inside and outside the country may be coalescing around Zelensky as an alternative to Zelensky's leadership, according to Sloboda. Aware of this threat, Zelensky has replaced several of Zelensky's generals in the past weeks, fired them without any consultation with him, said Sloboda. The analyst also noted the recent death of a top aide to Zelensky, who was killed earlier this month when a grenade given to him as a birthday gift exploded. Sloboda speculates that the strange incident may have been a political hit by Zelensky's administration. Most of the Ukrainian social media channels believe it was a political hit, a warning to Zelensky. Now, Zelensky has faced criticism over Ukraine's counteroffensive earlier this year, which failed to significantly challenge Russian forces as the country's special military operation in Ukraine continues. Now, what would a coup in Ukraine do other than just replace Zelensky with a military leader? Would it make the military more effective? Based on what is being reported on the battlefield, I don't believe that it would. Now, if this analysis is true, then what's the other reason for getting rid of Zelensky? What would a negotiated peace with Russia look like as far as eastern Ukraine and Crimea are concerned? And quite frankly, I'm not sure. But what this means to me is that Russia has won the conflict and all players are trying to figure out what post-war Ukraine looks like. How does this impact Ukraine's push to be more pro-West? Now, it doesn't look good for the democratized West and their stated goals for Ukraine. Now, here are my thoughts about this situation. So first, it looks like some of the Western allies are souring on the idea of a blank check support for Ukraine. And just as an example, Poland and Germany have recently said they are out of ammunition to even protect their own borders. And as a matter of fact, Germany recently projected they could execute a military operation for only a few days because of how low their stockpiles are. The U.S. is still going all in and recently saying they want to quadruple their ammunition production in the immediate future. Like I've always said, war is the biggest moneymaker there is. Now, I've had a lot of questions from the get-go about this conflict that started in 2022. And what was the war all about? Was it just to contain Russia? Was it to kick them out of eastern Ukraine? Was it to bring Ukraine into NATO? After all, it's well documented that Putin has dreamed of reestablishing the old Soviet empire, and certainly since the pro-West movements in 2014. Now, after the initial disinformation from the mainstream media about how well Ukraine was doing, it's become very apparent Russia is going to prevail militarily. And the latest failed Ukrainian counteroffensive is more evidence of that reality. Now, it seems that Russia has not only won the battle on the ground in Ukraine, but also the proxy war with the Western powers as well. It shows that the U.S. power is waning around the world, and our current administration's feckless foreign policy with blunders in Afghanistan and limited influence in the Israeli-Hamas conflict just reinforces the idea that we are moving into a world where the concepts of freedom and democracy are not primary. And communism and totalitarianism are on the rise. Russia has effectively circumvented all efforts from the West to isolate it and hurt it using sanctions. As soon as the sanctions were put in place, Russia pivoted east, where they found willing oil buyers in China and India. Now, I've seen some articles that say that Russia is making more money now from oil sales than they were before the conflict started in Ukraine. It's also rumored that China is aiding Russia militarily as well. Now, let me take a quick detour here and read a little bit about Russia, how Russia views Ukraine, which will shed light on why Ukraine is so important to Putin. And I got this actually off of the Council on Foreign Relations website. And the title of this particular article was Ukraine, Conflict at the Crossroads of Europe and Russia. Ukraine's westward drift since independence has been countered by the sometimes violent tug of Russia, felt most recently with Putin's 2022 invasion. And this was written by Jonathan Masters, and it was updated on February 14th of 2023. And again, this is a Council on Foreign Relations research into the relationship between Russia and Ukraine. What are Russia's broad interests in Ukraine? Russia has deep cultural, economic, and political bonds with Ukraine, and in many ways, Ukraine is central to Russia's identity and vision for itself in the world. Russia and Ukraine have strong familial bonds that go back centuries. It was in Kiev in the 8th and 9th centuries that Christianity was brought from Byzantium to the Slavic peoples. And it was Christianity that served as the anchor for Kievan Rus, the early Slavic state from which modern Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians draw their lineage. Now, why is Ukraine a geopolitical flashpoint? Ukraine was the cornerstone of the Soviet Union. Behind only Russia, it was the second most populous and powerful of the 15 Soviet republics, home to much of the Union's agricultural production, defense industries, and military, including the Black Sea Fleet and some of its nuclear arsenal. Now, the Crimea, which is very important. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev transferred Crimea from Russia to Ukraine in 1954 to strengthen the brotherly ties between the Ukrainian and Russian peoples. However, since the fall of the Soviet Union, many Russian nationalists in both Russia and Crimea longed for a return of the peninsula. The city of Sevastopol is home port for Russia's Black Sea Fleet and the dominant maritime force in the region. What triggered Russia's move in Crimea and the Donbas in 2014? It was Ukraine's ties with the EU that brought tensions to a head with Russia in 2013 and 14. In late 2013, President Yanukovych, acting under pressure from his supporters in Moscow, scrapped plans to formalize a closer economic relationship with the EU. Russia had at the same time been pressing Ukraine to join the not yet formed EAEU. Many Ukrainians perceived Yanukovych's decision as a betrayal by a deeply corrupt and incompetent government, and it ignited countrywide protests known as Euromaidan. Putin framed the ensuing tumult of Euromaidan, which forced Yanukovych from power, as a Western-backed fascist coup that endangered the ethnic Russian majority in Crimea. In response, Putin ordered a covert invasion of Crimea that he later justified as a rescue operation. To quote Putin, "There is a limit to everything, and with Ukraine, our Western partners have crossed that line." Now, what are the objectives? What are Russia's objectives in the Ukraine? According to this research, Putin's Russia has been described as a revanchist power, keen to regain its former power and prestige. It was always Putin's goal to restore Russia to the status of a great power in northern Eurasia, writes Gerald Toll, an international affairs professor at Virginia Tech, in his book Near Abroad. The end goal was not to recreate the Soviet Union, but to make Russia great again. By seizing Crimea in 2014, Russia solidified its control of the strategic foothold on the Black Sea. With the larger and more sophisticated military presence there, Russia can project power deep into the Mediterranean, Middle East, and North Africa, where it has traditionally had limited influence. Now, what has been the U.S. priorities in Ukraine? Immediately following the Soviet collapse, Washington's priority was pushing Ukraine, along with Belarus and Kazakhstan, to forfeit its nuclear arsenal so that only Russia would retain the former Union's weapons. Former U.S. National Security Advisor Brzezinski, in Foreign Affairs in early 1994, described a healthy and stable Ukraine as a critical counterweight to Russia, and the linchpin of what he advocated should be the new U.S. grand strategy after the Civil War. To quote Brzezinski, "It cannot be stressed strongly enough that without Ukraine, Russia ceases to be an empire. But with Ukraine suborned, then the subordinate, and it cannot be stressed strongly enough that without Ukraine, Russia ceases to be an empire. But with Ukraine subordinated, Russia automatically becomes an empire." And then finally, what is the U.S. and EU's policy in Ukraine? The United States remains committed to the restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. It does not recognize Russia's claim to Crimea or the other regions unlawfully annexed by Russia. Prior to the 2022 invasion, the United States supported a settlement of the Donbas conflict via the Minsk agreement. So as you can see, the roots run very deep between Russia and the Ukraine, and it's going to be very difficult to sever those ties. So if kicking Russia out of Ukraine was not going to be a reality, why try in the first place? A push for a pro-West Ukraine without any Russian territorial control and influence, in my view, was and is going to require a large-scale war that no one, thank God, wants. And so, if Russia is going to prevail, then what does that mean? Did the Biden administration and the anti-Russian hawks not care or foresee this outcome? Are they idiots to think it could have worked? We don't know, but I certainly don't think that's the case. Draining the U.S. of vital treasure and arms was, in my view, one of the overall objectives of this mission. If the goal was to put Russia in check on the world stage, that failed. Arguably, Russia is wealthier now from its exports, primarily oil, like I mentioned before, than it was before the so-called sanctions were put in place. And those, by the way, had so many loopholes as to be effective in name only. Now, it is largely accepted that the U.S. was involved with the coup in 2014 that installed a pro-West president in Ukraine, which precipitated Russia's invasion of the Donbas shortly thereafter. Now, I do not see Russia giving up Crimea or a land bridge to get there. After all, their entire Black Sea naval fleet is located there. It seems like a stalemate is the likely outcome, unless Ukraine's allies are willing to invade and kick the Russians out. So this to me shows the U.S. is losing its influence on the world stage. In my view, this is the last step to bringing about a multipolar world order with the US, Russia, and China in control. And guess who's the odd man out in that scenario? Now, the people who control our current administration, and I would say most of the administrations in the recent past, with the exception of Trump's administration, want the United States standing in the world to be significantly degraded. These people are globalists, and their worldview is more in line with organizations like the World Economic Forum, and certainly not America First. Now, communism has always been below the surface in the United States, at least since the beginning of the 20th century. I'm not going to go into that, but go ahead and Google Wall Street financing the communists and people like Trotsky in the early 1900s, and then make your own conclusions. This has been the plan of globalist elites for decades. A single global government would by definition be totalitarian, with a small group of elites controlling the masses in a top-down controlled environment. Now, that is exactly what communism, fascism, and socialism are. Collectivist forms of government where the rights and freedoms of the citizens are completely controlled by an elite few. Now, to give you an example, I'll just quote one of the globalist elites, David Rockefeller. And I got this. This is off of the sgtreport.com website. The title was David Rockefeller's chilling 1991 speech at a Bilderberg meeting. And this was actually put out on January 9th of 2022 by Kaylee Brown from the Lou Rockwell website. So the transcript from a 1991 Bilderberg group meeting in Baden, Germany was released, proving how diluted Rockefeller's views truly were. Bill Clinton was also in attendance at this meeting, and I'm sure along with many other members of the elite class, Rockefeller stated, and this is quoting Rockefeller in his speech, "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity during these years. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries." Now, this quote is extremely revealing, as it proves that not only was Rockefeller striving to create a one world government since well before 1991, but mainstream media news outlets were aware of it and chose not to disclose this information to the public. It's disturbing that mainstream media turned a blind eye to this. However, it's not really surprising given the fact that the elite people attending these types of meetings are the very people who fund and control these news corporations. And then David Rockefeller further wrote in his 2002 memoirs, quoting here, "Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I'm proud of it." Our founding fathers knew this early on. The American experiment, that of self-governance within a framework of laws, a sovereign individual, is the exception in the history of the world. The norm has always been top-down control from a small group of elites, which is exactly what communism, socialism, and fascism are. I feel this American experiment is dangerously close to being dismantled and transformed. And even as I say this, I see the real possibilities of a civil war here in the United States and a serious upheaval in this country that I love so much. When Putin and Xi met last year, Xi mentioned that conditions have not been this advantageous for a communist rise to global power in the last 100 years. Now, I urge you to research what was happening 100 years ago and why the idea of communism was so popular all over the world. Now, make no mistake about it, however, communism, socialism, fascism are all destructive forces with total control over every aspect of the citizens' lives being the goal. History showed us that once installed, in their wake is hundreds of millions of people dead, gulags, poverty, and despair. It took 2 world wars and a complete upheaval of the world order to stop it the first 2 times. It's depressing to think about the future this way, but the American way of life, of freedom and self-determination, are the exception and not the rule. Benjamin Franklin knew this when he famously answered a passerby during the Constitutional Convention by saying that our new form of government is a republic if we can keep it, meaning it's up to an informed and diligent citizenry to protect and fight for it. Now, Reagan also saw this when he said that we are generally 2 to 3 generations away from losing our freedoms. And I fear this is what we are seeing unfolding right in front of us today. All I can say is America and the American dream are worth protecting and fighting for. A weakened U.S. is bad for the entire world. The only true free society has been taken apart from the inside over the last 3 to 4 decades. And this is happening just as 2 of the most powerful communist states are coming into prominence. Freedom is on the wane, and that will lead to dark times, in my view. All right, so that's it for now. I'll end this like I always do, and I certainly appreciate you guys watching. If you're in the military, fire departments, police departments, or first responders, if that's you out there, thank you very much for your service. Stay safe. This is the Rain Man. Until next time, thanks for watching. Thanks for watching Rain Man's Take, Observations on the World We Live in. If you like the content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. You can also follow Rain Man's Take on Instagram at Rain Man's Take. Also, check out our website at www.rainmanstakepodcast.com and send your comments to rainmanstake@gmail.com. Keep an eye out for future podcasts, which will be coming out every Thursday at 5 p.m. West Coast time.